Don't abandon me at this gas station. My stepmother left, leaving me behind at 8 years old. I just never imagined that one day I would be cooking in her house, recording every confession. I was 8 years old when I discovered that some people can look you in the eyes and lie about loving you. I was standing at that gas station on I-80 in the middle of nowhere, Nebraska, watching my stepmother's car disappear down the highway like I had never existed. The smell of diesel burned my nose. The sound of trucks made my chest ache, and I still believed she was coming back. "Emma, honey, use the restroom while I get gas," Veronica had said with that sweet, fake smile. "We'll be right here when you come out." 3 hours later, I was still sitting on that concrete bench, small and invisible, while strangers walked past me like I was part of the scenery. That's when I understood the truth that would change my life forever. Some people are capable of abandoning a child like she's garbage. But what Veronica didn't know, what she could never imagine, was that scared little girl would grow up, and one day I would come back to serve her exactly what she deserved. My name is Lily Parker now, but you can call me Emma, and this is the story of how I became the private chef for the woman who murdered my father and destroyed my family. She has no idea who I am, not yet. Let me go back to the beginning so you understand how we got here. It all started when I was 8 years old, standing in our kitchen in Greenwich, Connecticut, watching my father David make pancakes the way my mother used to. Mom had died 6 months earlier in a car accident. Just like that, on a rainy Tuesday, she was gone. Dad was trying so hard to keep us together, to keep her memory alive in small ways. The pancakes, her favorite songs on Sunday mornings. The way he'd still set out 2 coffee cups out of habit, then quietly put one back. That's when Veronica walked into our lives. She appeared at our door one evening with a casserole and the kind of smile that made you want to trust her immediately. "I heard about your loss," she said to Dad, her voice soft and caring. "I know how hard it must be, raising Emma alone." Dad was vulnerable, lonely. And Veronica? She was beautiful, attentive, and seemed to genuinely care about both of us. Within 3 months, she'd moved in. Within 6, they were married. I should have seen the signs earlier, the way her kindness disappeared the moment Dad left for work, how she'd smile at me in front of him, then ignore me completely when we were alone. The phone calls she'd take in hushed tones, always stepping outside or into another room. But I was 8. What did I know about deception? The first time she hit me, I was so shocked I didn't even cry. Dad was at a business conference in Chicago. I'd accidentally knocked over her expensive perfume bottle while reaching for my toothbrush. The slap came so fast, so unexpected, that I just stood there, my cheek burning, staring at this woman who was supposed to be my new mother. "Clumsy little brat," she hissed. "Don't you dare tell your father about this. He has enough stress without dealing with your problems." And I didn't tell him. Because somehow, at 8 years old, I already understood that adults didn't always believe children, that sometimes the truth was too complicated for grown-ups to handle. What I didn't know was that Veronica had a secret that would destroy everything. His name was Victor. I discovered him by accident one Thursday afternoon when I came home early from school with a fever. I walked into our house and heard voices upstairs. Veronica's laugh, but different, intimate, dangerous. I crept up the stairs, my small feet silent on the carpet, and peered through the crack in her bedroom door. There was a man I'd never seen before, tall and dark-haired, holding my stepmother in a way that made my stomach twist with confusion and fear. They were kissing, touching, saying things that even at 8 I knew were wrong. "When are you going to leave him?" the man asked. "Victor," she called him. "Soon," Veronica whispered. "Once I figure out how to get the most money out of this situation." David's life insurance policy is substantial, and there's the house, his business. And the kid? Veronica's laugh was cold. "Emma won't be a problem much longer." I didn't understand what they meant then. I wish I never had to find out. 3 weeks later, Dad found out about Victor. I don't know how. Maybe he saw a text message or noticed something different about Veronica. But that night, I heard them fighting downstairs. Really fighting. Dad's voice, usually so calm and measured, was shaking with rage. "How long, Veronica? How long have you been lying to me?" David, please, let me explain. Explain what? That you've been cheating on me in the bed I shared with my wife? That you've been planning to… What? Kill me for the insurance money? There was silence. Then Veronica's voice, different now, colder. You don't understand the situation you're in, David. The next morning, Dad was dead. They said it was an accident, a tragic, random accident on Route 1 just outside Greenwich. Dad had been walking. His car was found abandoned a mile away with a flat tire. A famous NFL player named Marcus Thompson was driving home from a charity event when Dad suddenly appeared in the road. Marcus was devastated. The media painted him as a victim too, a good man whose life was forever changed by a split-second tragedy. He visited us at the funeral, tears in his eyes, promising to help however he could. Veronica played her part perfectly. The grieving widow, suddenly alone with a stepdaughter, struggling to make sense of a senseless loss. She accepted Marcus's sympathy, his offers of help, his guilt-driven generosity. What nobody knew, what I couldn't prove at 8 years old, was that I'd seen Veronica leave the house that night after the fight. I'd watched from my bedroom window as she drove away in Dad's car, returning hours later without it. But who would believe a traumatized child over a grieving widow? 6 months after the funeral, Veronica and Marcus were dating. A year later, they were married. And I was about to discover what Veronica meant when she said I wouldn't be a problem much longer. The day they abandoned me started like any other. Veronica announced we were taking a road trip to visit some relatives in Nebraska. I was excited. I'd never met any of Dad's family, and the idea of connecting with people who knew him felt like a gift. We drove for hours, Veronica chatting pleasantly about the relatives we were going to see, how much they were looking forward to meeting me. Victor was driving. She'd introduced him as a family friend who was helping with the trip. When we stopped at the Flying J truck stop just off I-80, Veronica turned to me with that fake, sweet smile I'd learned to fear. "Emma, honey, use the restroom while I get gas. We'll be right here when you come out." I remember the smell of diesel fuel and the sound of 18-wheelers idling. I remember the fluorescent lights in the bathroom and how they made everything look sickly and wrong. I remember taking my time because something in Veronica's voice had made me nervous. When I came out of that bathroom, the car was gone. Just gone. I stood there for a moment, thinking maybe they'd moved to a different pump. Maybe they were inside buying snacks. But as the minutes ticked by, as truck after truck pulled in and out of the station, the truth settled over me like a cold blanket. They weren't coming back. I waited for 3 hours on that concrete bench, watching trucks come and go, thinking maybe she'd come back. Maybe this was some kind of test, or mistake, or cruel joke that would end with relief and apologies. That's when Joe found me. He was this big, gentle man with kind eyes and hands that looked like they'd worked hard their whole life. He was filling up his 18-wheeler when he noticed me sitting alone, and something about the way I was sitting, small and still and trying not to cry, made him walk over. "Where's your family, little one?" he asked, his voice soft despite his size. I didn't know how to tell him I didn't have one anymore. Joe waited with me for another hour, buying me a sandwich and a Coke, asking gentle questions about where I was supposed to be going. When it became clear that nobody was coming back for me, he made a decision that would change my life. "I can't leave you here," he said simply. "My wife Martha and we live about 2 hours south of here. Small town called Salina. You can stay with us until we figure out what to do." I should have been scared. Stranger danger and all that. But something about Joe felt safe in a way that nothing had felt safe for a very long time. The drive to Salina was quiet. Joe didn't push me to talk, didn't ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. He just drove through the Kansas countryside while I stared out the window and tried to understand how my life had become so small and broken. Martha was waiting on the porch when we pulled up to their little house on Elm Street. She was round and warm and smelled like cinnamon, and when she saw me climb out of Joe's truck, she didn't ask questions. She just opened her arms. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, and I fell into that hug like it was the first safe place I'd found in months. That night, lying in their guest room under a quilt Martha had made herself, I made a decision. Emma was the little girl who'd been abandoned at a truck stop. Emma was weak and unwanted and forgotten. But Lily could be strong. And someday, Lily would go home. The next 12 years in Salina taught me everything Veronica never intended for me to learn. Joe and Martha didn't have much money, but they had something more valuable. They had love that didn't come with conditions. Joe drove long-haul routes, sometimes gone for weeks at a time. But when he was home, he taught me practical things: how to change a tire, how to read people's intentions in their body language, how to be strong without being hard. "Life's gonna try to knock you down, Lily," he'd say, using the name I'd chosen for myself. "The trick isn't avoiding the hits. It's learning how to get back up smarter than you were before." Martha taught me to cook. Not just basic survival cooking, but real cooking. The kind that turns ingredients into love, that brings people together around a table, that can heal hearts and build bridges. "Food is honest," she'd say, watching me knead bread dough. "You can't fake good food. It either nourishes people or it doesn't. There's no in-between." I threw myself into cooking the way some kids throw themselves into sports or music. It became my language, my art, my therapy. Every technique I mastered, every flavor I learned to balance, every dish I perfected, it all felt like building armor against the world that had tried to break me. By the time I was 16, I was cooking for church potlucks and community events. By 18, I was working weekends at the nicest restaurant in Salina, which wasn't saying much, but it was a start. And all the while, I was planning. I never forgot Veronica's face, never forgot the sound of her fake sympathy or the cold calculation in her eyes. I never forgot Victor, or the way they'd talked about my father like he was just an obstacle to be removed. Most of all, I never forgot the boy. His name was Bobby then, and he was about my age, maybe a year older. I'd seen him a few times during those last months in Greenwich, usually playing in the yard next to ours. We'd talked over the fence a couple of times, just kid stuff, but there was something about him that stuck with me. Kind eyes, a shy smile, the way he'd offered to share his cookies when he saw me sitting alone on our back steps. I wondered sometimes what had happened to him, whether he remembered the little girl from next door, whether he'd grown up happy and safe, or whether Veronica's poison had touched his life too. I found out the answer when I was 19, working as a prep cook at a high-end restaurant in Kansas City. I was scrolling through social media during my break when I saw a photo that made my blood freeze. It was a family picture from some charity gala. Marcus Thompson, older now but still recognizable from his NFL days, standing next to Veronica in an expensive dress. And between them, a young man with familiar kind eyes and that same shy smile. The caption read, "Marcus Thompson and family at the Children's Hospital benefit, pictured with wife Veronica and son Jordan." Jordan. Not Bobby anymore, but Jordan Thompson. My Bobby had become Veronica's son. The rage that filled me in that moment was unlike anything I'd ever felt. It wasn't just about what she'd done to me, or even what she'd done to my father. It was about what she was doing to him, this boy who'd been kind to me when kindness was rare. That night, I made a decision that would define the next year of my life. I was going back to Greenwich, but not as Emma, the abandoned little girl, and not as Lily, the small-town cook from Kansas. I was going back as someone new, someone strong enough to face Veronica and smart enough to beat her at her own game. The planning took months. I researched everything: Marcus's business interests, their social circle, their household staff. I learned that they employed a rotating series of private chefs, usually through an exclusive agency called Platinum Household Services. I spent 6 months in culinary school in New York, perfecting techniques I'd only read about: French cuisine, molecular gastronomy, wine pairing. Everything that would make me irresistible to someone like Marcus, who'd developed expensive tastes during his years with Veronica. I created a new identity. Lily Parker, graduate of Le Cordon Bleu Paris, forged documents that cost me 3 months' salary. Former private chef to tech billionaires in Silicon Valley, fake references I paid good money for. Available for immediate placement with the right family. The hardest part was changing how I looked. I'd grown tall, 5'7" now, compared to the tiny 8-year-old Veronica had abandoned. My hair was different, darker, styled in a sleek bob that made me look sophisticated and professional. I wore glasses now and had developed a slight Kansas accent that masked the Connecticut inflection of my childhood. But the biggest change was in my eyes. The scared, desperate look of that abandoned little girl was gone, replaced by something harder, more focused, more dangerous. When Platinum Household Services called to tell me about a position with the Thompson family, I felt my heart rate spike. This was it. After 12 years, I was going home. The family is very particular, the agency coordinator explained. Mrs. Thompson especially. She's had some difficulties with previous chefs. Nothing personal, you understand, but she has very high standards. I almost laughed, if only she knew. I'm sure we'll get along perfectly, I said. The interview was scheduled for a Tuesday in March. I drove from Kansas to Connecticut in Joe's old pickup truck, the same one he'd used to rescue me all those years ago. It felt like bringing a piece of my real family with me into enemy territory. The Thompson estate was everything I'd expected and more. Sprawling grounds, circular driveway, the kind of house that screamed old money, even though I knew it was built on blood and lies. I sat in that truck for a full 5 minutes before getting out, just breathing and centering myself. This was it. After 12 years of planning and dreaming and preparing, I was about to come face to face with the woman who'd destroyed my family. The front door was answered by a housekeeper, middle-aged, efficient, kind eyes. She led me through rooms that were decorated with the sort of tasteful elegance that money could buy but couldn't earn. And then I saw her. Veronica was standing in the kitchen, examining something on her phone with the same expression of mild disdain I remembered from my childhood. She'd aged well. Expensive skincare and regular spa treatments had kept her looking younger than her years. Her hair was perfectly styled, her clothes clearly designer, her jewelry understated but obviously expensive. She looked up when I entered, and for one heart-stopping moment, I thought she might recognize me. But her eyes passed over me with the same dismissive glance she'd give any service provider. I was just another chef, another employee, another person beneath her notice. "Miss Parker," she said, her voice carrying that same false warmth I remembered. "Thank you for coming. I understand you have experience with discerning clients?" "Yes, ma'am," I replied, keeping my voice steady and professional. "I believe in creating culinary experiences that exceed expectations." We talked for 20 minutes about menus and dietary restrictions and scheduling. She asked about my background, and I delivered my carefully crafted lies with the confidence of someone who'd practiced them 1,000 times. The whole time, I was studying her, looking for signs of guilt, of conscience, of any indication that she remembered the little girl she'd abandoned. But there was nothing. Just the same cold calculation I'd seen in her eyes when she was planning my father's death. "When can you start?" she asked finally. "Immediately," I said. As I drove away from the estate that day, I felt something I hadn't felt in 12 years. Hope. Not the gentle, healing hope that Joe and Martha had given me, but something sharper, more focused. The hope of justice. I moved into the staff quarters the following Monday. A small but comfortable apartment above the garage with its own entrance and a view of the gardens. It was strange, living so close to the house where my father had died, where my childhood had ended. But it was also perfect, because now I was inside. Now I could watch and listen and learn. Now I could start collecting the evidence I'd need to destroy the woman who destroyed my family. What I didn't expect was Jordan. I saw him on my 3rd day, coming home from work in a sleek BMW, still wearing a suit that probably cost more than Joe made in a month. He'd grown into his kindness, tall and lean, with those same gentle eyes that had offered me cookies over a fence 12 years ago. He didn't recognize me either, of course. But when he smiled and introduced himself, when he thanked me for the dinner I'd prepared and complimented the presentation, I felt something I hadn't planned for. I felt the ghost of that 8-year-old girl who'd had a crush on the boy next door. This was going to be more complicated than I'd thought. Living in the Thompson house was like being a spy in enemy territory. Every day, I cooked their meals, cleaned their kitchen, and listened to their conversations, all while maintaining the perfect facade of Lily Parker, professional chef. Marcus was easier to read than I'd expected. 12 years of guilt had worn on him, carved lines around his eyes that had nothing to do with age. He was generous with the staff, polite to everyone, and clearly trying to be a good man despite the weight he carried. But there were moments when I'd catch him staring into space, his jaw tight, his hands clenched. Moments when Veronica would mention David's accident, and Marcus would flinch like he'd been slapped. He knew. Maybe not the whole truth, but he knew something was wrong with the story he'd been told. Veronica, on the other hand, had perfected the art of being untouchable. She glided through her days like a queen in her castle, giving orders to the staff, planning charity events, and spending Marcus's money with the casual entitlement of someone who'd never worked for anything in her life. She was also paranoid. I noticed it in small things at first. The way she'd stop talking when I entered a room, how she'd check her phone obsessively, then delete messages immediately after reading them, the locked drawer in her desk that she thought nobody knew about. But the biggest revelation came during my second week, when I overheard a phone conversation that changed everything. I was in the pantry taking inventory of supplies when Veronica's voice drifted in from the adjacent office. She was talking to someone, her voice low and urgent. "Vincent, we've talked about this. You can't keep asking for more money." Vincent. Not Victor anymore, but close enough. "I don't care what you think you deserve," she continued. "The arrangement we have works because it's stable. If you get greedy, if you push too hard, everything falls apart." There was a pause, then, "Don't threaten me. You seem to forget that I'm not the only one with secrets. If I go down, you go down with me." My hands were shaking as I continued counting cans of tomatoes, trying to look busy while my mind raced. Victor was alive. Not only alive, but still connected to Veronica, still part of whatever web of lies they'd built around my father's death. That night, I called Joe from my apartment. "How are you settling in, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice warm and familiar across the miles. "It's complicated," I said, which was the understatement of the century. "You sure about this path you're on? It's not too late to come home, you know. Martha's got your room ready, and the diner in town is looking for a head cook." For a moment, I was tempted. The idea of going back to Selena, to safety and simplicity and people who loved me without conditions, was almost overwhelming. But then I thought about my father, about the boy who'd offered me cookies, about all the other people Veronica might hurt if someone didn't stop her. "I'm sure," I said. "But Joe, if something happens to me, nothing's going to happen to you," he said firmly. "You're stronger than you know, Lily. But you're also smart enough to know when to walk away. Don't let revenge make you stupid." The next morning, I met Vincent. He came to the house for what Veronica called a financial consultation, but I could see the truth in the way they looked at each other. The same heat, the same dangerous intimacy I'd witnessed as a child. He was older now, silver threading through his dark hair, but still handsome in that predatory way that some women found irresistible. He'd reinvented himself as Vincent Cross, financial advisor to the wealthy, but I could see Victor underneath the expensive suit and practiced charm. "You must be the new chef," he said when Veronica introduced us. "I've heard wonderful things about your work." His handshake was firm, his smile practiced, his eyes completely empty of recognition. Just like Veronica, he looked right through me, seeing only what he expected to see. But I saw him. I saw the man who'd helped plan my father's murder, who'd helped abandon an 8-year-old girl at a truck stop, who was now living comfortably off the proceeds of their crimes. "Thank you," I said, matching his smile with one of my own. "I believe in giving people exactly what they deserve." The irony was lost on him, of course. Over the following weeks, I began to understand the full scope of their operation. Vincent wasn't just Veronica's lover. He was Marcus's financial advisor, managing investments and business deals worth millions of dollars. The perfect position to skim money, to manipulate accounts, to slowly drain Marcus's wealth while appearing to grow it. They were playing a long game, and Marcus was the mark. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd brought me into their house. I started small. A recording app on my phone, activated whenever Vincent visited. Photos of documents left carelessly on Veronica's desk. Screenshots of text messages when she left her phone unattended. The evidence I collected painted a picture of ongoing fraud, emotional manipulation, and financial abuse. But it wasn't enough. I needed proof of the original crime, my father's murder. That's when Jordan became a problem. Not because he was suspicious of me, but because he was kind to me. Because he'd started staying in the kitchen while I cooked, asking about my techniques, sharing stories about his work as an architect. Because when he smiled, I could see the boy who'd offered me cookies, and my carefully constructed walls started to crack. "You're different from the other chefs we've had," he said one evening, watching me prepare a soufflé for his parents' dinner party. "Different? How?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "I don't know. More present, I guess. Like you're really paying attention to everything around you." If only he knew how right he was. "I believe in being thorough," I said. He laughed. "That's one way to put it. Sometimes I feel like you're studying us, like we're some kind of fascinating social experiment." My hand stilled on the whisk. "Was I that obvious?" "I'm sorry if I've made you uncomfortable," I said carefully. "No, not uncomfortable. Just curious. There's something about you that seems familiar, but I can't place it." My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to smile. I have one of those faces, I guess. But as the days passed, I could see him watching me more closely. Not with suspicion exactly, but with the kind of attention that meant he was starting to see past my carefully constructed facade. It was dangerous, but it was also something else. It was the first real connection I'd felt with another person since Joe and Martha had taken me in. The breakthrough came during my 6th week in the house. Veronica had gone to New York for a spa weekend, leaving Marcus at home with a schedule full of business meetings. I was cleaning her office when I noticed that her computer was still logged in. My hands were shaking as I opened her email, knowing I had maybe 10 minutes before someone might come looking for me. Most of her recent messages were routine: charity committee correspondence, social invitations, shopping confirmations. But buried in her archived folders, I found gold. Email threads from 12 years ago between Veronica and Victor discussing the David problem and permanent solutions. Messages about life insurance policies and inheritance laws. Most damning of all, a draft email that was never sent, detailing exactly how they'd planned to stage my father's death. I photographed everything with trembling hands, my heart pounding so hard I was sure someone would hear it. This was it. This was the evidence I needed to destroy them both. But as I was closing the laptop, I heard footsteps in the hallway. I barely had time to pocket my phone and grab a dust cloth before Jordan appeared in the doorway. "Lily, what are you doing in here?" "Cleaning," I said, hoping my voice sounded steadier than I felt. "Mrs. Thompson asked me to dust her office while she was away." He looked around the room, his eyes lingering on the computer, then back to me. For a moment, I thought he was going to call me out, demand to know what I was really doing. Instead, he stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. "We need to talk," he said. My mouth went dry. "About what?" "About who you really are," he said quietly, "and why you're really here." The game was up. After 6 weeks of careful planning and perfect execution, I'd been caught by the one person I'd never expected to see through my disguise. But as I looked into Jordan's eyes, those same kind eyes that had offered comfort to a lonely little girl, I realized something that changed everything. He wasn't angry. He wasn't suspicious. He was concerned. "I know you," he said softly. "I've been trying to figure out how, but I know you, and whatever you're doing here, whatever you're looking for, I think I want to help." For the first time in 12 years, I felt like that 8-year-old girl again. Scared and alone, and desperate for someone to believe her. "You won't believe me," I whispered. "Try me," he said. So I did. I told him everything. About Emma and David and the truck stop, about Joe and Martha and 12 years of planning, about the evidence I'd been collecting and the justice I was seeking. I told him about the boy next door who'd been kind to me when kindness was rare, and how seeing him again had complicated everything I thought I knew about revenge. When I finished, the room was silent, except for the sound of our breathing. "Emma," he said finally, and the way he said my real name, with recognition and wonder and something that might have been relief, made my eyes fill with tears. "You remember," I said. "I never forgot," he said. "The little girl next door who looked so sad all the time. I used to wonder what happened to you after David died. Veronica said you'd gone to live with relatives, that you were happy and safe, but something about the way she said it never felt right." "She abandoned me," I said, the words coming out harder than I'd intended. "At a truck stop in Nebraska. Left me there like garbage." The pain that crossed his face was so genuine, so immediate, that I knew without a doubt that he'd had no part in what happened to me. "God, Emma, I'm so sorry. If I'd known—" "You were just a kid too," I said. "There was nothing you could have done." "But I'm not a kid anymore," he said, his voice growing stronger. "And if what you're telling me is true, if Veronica and Vincent really killed your father, you believe me?" He was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Then, "I've always known something was wrong with that night. The official story never made sense. David was careful, responsible. He wouldn't have been walking on Route 1 in the dark unless something forced him to." "Veronica forced him to," I said. "She pushed him out of his own car and left him there to die. And Marcus. I think he knows something's wrong, but he's too guilty about the accident to look too closely. Vincent's been managing his finances for years, probably stealing from him the whole time." Jordan ran his hands through his hair, processing everything I'd told him. "What do you need?" he asked, finally. "What?" "To prove it. To get justice for your father." "What do you need?" The question caught me off guard. I'd been planning this alone for so long that the idea of having an ally, especially him, felt almost too good to be true. "More evidence," I said. "Recordings of them admitting what they did. Financial records showing the theft. Something concrete enough that the police can't ignore it." "I can help with that," he said. "I know where Vincent keeps his files, and I have access to Marcus's accounts. If there's evidence to find, we'll find it." "Why?" I asked. "Why would you help me? Veronica raised you. She's the only mother you've ever known." His laugh was bitter. "Is she? Because the woman who raised me was cold and calculating and never showed affection unless there was an audience. The woman who raised me made it clear that I was only valuable as long as I made Marcus look good. The woman who raised me—" He trailed off, then looked at me with something like revelation in his eyes. "She's not my mother, is she?" I thought about the DNA test I'd been planning to run, about the evidence I'd already collected suggesting Vincent was his biological father. But looking at Jordan's face, seeing the hope and fear warring in his expression, I realized this wasn't my secret to reveal. "I think that's something you need to find out for yourself," I said gently. He nodded, understanding passing between us. "Then we'll find that out too." For the first time since I'd walked back into this house, I felt like I wasn't alone, but I also felt something else. Something that scared me more than Veronica's cruelty or Vincent's greed. I felt hope. Working with Jordan changed everything. What had been a solo mission of revenge became something else entirely. A partnership built on shared pain and the desperate need for truth. Over the next few weeks, we developed a system. Jordan would create opportunities for me to search Vincent's briefcase when he visited. I would photograph documents while Jordan kept watch. Together, we mapped out the financial fraud that had been bleeding Marcus dry for years. The evidence was staggering. Vincent had been skimming from Marcus's investments, creating fake business opportunities, even forging signatures on loan documents. But more than that, we found communications between Vincent and Veronica that painted a picture of a relationship that had never ended. They weren't just business partners. They were still lovers, still conspirators, still the same two people who had murdered my father. "Look at this," Jordan said one evening, showing me a bank statement he'd printed from Marcus's home office. Vincent moved $2 million to an offshore account last month. Marcus doesn't even know it's gone. I studied the numbers. my anger building with each zero. They're planning something big, I said. This isn't just skimming anymore. This is preparation for an exit strategy. What do you mean? I mean they're getting ready to disappear, again. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the pattern, how Veronica had moved from my father to Marcus, how she'd reinvented herself each time, how she always seemed to stay one step ahead of consequences. How many other families had she destroyed? How many other children had she abandoned? The next morning brought a revelation that changed everything. I was serving breakfast when Marcus's phone rang. He answered it in front of us, his face growing pale as he listened. "What do you mean, irregularities?" he said. "I don't understand." "Yes, I'll be there this afternoon." When he hung up, Veronica was immediately at his side, all concern and sympathy. "What's wrong, darling?" "The IRS," Marcus said, his voice hollow. "They want to audit our finances. They're saying there are discrepancies in our tax filings, unexplained income, missing documentation." I watched Veronica's face carefully. For just a moment, I saw panic flicker in her eyes before she smoothed it away. "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding," she said. "Vincent handles all of that. He'll sort it out." But I could see the wheels turning in her head. The IRS audit wasn't part of their plan. Someone else was investigating, someone with more power than a 20-year-old chef with a grudge. That afternoon, while Marcus was at his meeting with federal agents, Veronica made a phone call that I recorded from the kitchen. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. "The feds are sniffing around." "No, I don't know how they found out." "Vincent, listen to me. We need to accelerate the timeline." There was a long pause, then, "Fine. But if we're doing this, we're doing it right. No loose ends this time. No witnesses." My blood ran cold. They weren't just planning to disappear with Marcus's money. They were planning to eliminate anyone who could connect them to their crimes. Including Marcus. Including me. I found Jordan in the garage, working on his car. When I told him what I'd overheard, his face went white. "We have to warn him," he said. "We have to tell Marcus what they're planning." "With what proof?" I asked. "A recording of half a phone conversation? He'll never believe us. Veronica's had 12 years to make herself indispensable to him. We're just the help. Then what do we do?" I thought about Joe's words. "Don't let revenge make you stupid." But this wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about survival. "We beat them at their own game," I said. "But we have to be smart about it." That night I called Joe. "I need you to do something for me," I said. "And I need you to trust me, even if it sounds crazy." "What do you need, sweetheart?" "I need you to call the FBI. Tell them you have information about a murder that happened 12 years ago in Greenwich, Connecticut. Tell them you know who killed David Morrison." There was a long silence. "Lily, what are you mixed up in?" "Justice," I said. Finally. The next few days were a careful dance of preparation and deception. Jordan and I gathered every piece of evidence we could find: financial records, email printouts, recorded conversations, even DNA samples from Vincent's coffee cup. But Veronica and Vincent were moving fast, too. I could see it in the way they looked at each other, in the hushed conversations that stopped when I entered a room, in the sudden appearance of packed suitcases in the guest room. They were planning to run. Soon. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. I was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, when Veronica walked in with a look I'd never seen before. Not the cold calculation I was used to, but something sharper, more dangerous. "Lily," she said, her voice deceptively calm. "We need to talk." I kept chopping vegetables, trying to appear casual. "Of course, Mrs. Thompson. What can I help you with? You can start by telling me who you really are." My knife stilled on the cutting board. "I'm sorry? Vincent ran a background check on you today. Very thorough, very expensive. And you know what he found?" I turned to face her, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." "Lily Parker doesn't exist," she said, stepping closer. "The culinary school records are fake. The references are fake. Even your social security number belongs to a woman who died in Kansas 5 years ago." I could feel the walls closing in, but I forced myself to stay calm. I think there's been some mistake. The only mistake, Veronica said, was thinking you could fool me twice. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? Did you really think I wouldn't recognize you eventually? The way you hold your head when you're concentrating. The little scar on your left hand from when you cut yourself on my perfume bottle. The way you say, Mrs. Thompson, with just a hint of that old Connecticut accent you've tried so hard to hide. I stared at her, my carefully constructed world crumbling around me. "Hello, Emma," she said with a smile that was pure poison. "Welcome home." The game was over. After months of planning and preparation, I'd been caught by the one person I'd underestimated. But as I looked into Veronica's eyes, I realized something that changed everything. She was scared. For all her bravado, for all her threats and revelations, she was terrified. Because if I was here, if I'd found her after all these years, it meant her past was catching up with her. It meant she wasn't as untouchable as she'd thought. "You killed my father," I said quietly. "I did what I had to do," she replied, "just like I'm going to do what I have to do now." "Which is?" Her smile widened. "The same thing I should have done 12 years ago. Finish what I started." That's when I heard the footsteps behind me and Vincent's voice saying, "Hello, little Emma. You've grown up." I was trapped between them, in the kitchen where I'd spent months planning their downfall, and I realized that all my careful preparation might not be enough. But then I heard something else. The sound of car doors slamming in the driveway. The sound of heavy footsteps on the front porch. The sound of Jordan's voice calling out, "FBI! We have a warrant!" Veronica's face went white. "That's impossible. You're just a chef. You're nobody." "You're right," I said, pulling out my phone and showing her the recording app that had been running the entire time. "I am nobody, but my father was somebody, and the people who loved him never stopped looking for the truth." The kitchen door burst open, and federal agents flooded in, weapons drawn. "Veronica Thompson, Vincent Cross, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, and tax evasion." As they read Veronica her rights, she looked at me with something I'd never seen in her eyes before. Fear, real, genuine fear. "This isn't over," she said as they led her away in handcuffs. "Yes," I said quietly. "It is." The arrest was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, as the FBI investigation unfolded, the full scope of Veronica and Vincent's crimes became clear. They hadn't just killed my father and defrauded Marcus. They'd been running variations of the same con for over 15 years. There had been other victims, other families destroyed, other children left behind to pick up the pieces. I testified before a grand jury, telling my story to a room full of strangers who listened with the kind of attention I'd dreamed of as an 8-year-old girl. Jordan testified too, providing financial evidence and corroborating details about the fraud. Marcus was devastated, not just by the financial losses, though those were substantial, but by the realization that his entire marriage had been built on lies. That the woman he'd loved and trusted had been planning his death. "I should have known," he said to me one afternoon, as we sat in the kitchen where I'd served him hundreds of meals. There were signs, things that didn't add up. But I was so guilty about the accident, so grateful that Veronica didn't blame me. "She counted on that," I said. "Guilt makes people vulnerable. She's an expert at finding people's weak spots and exploiting them, like she did with your father." I nodded. Dad was lonely and grieving. She gave him what he thought he needed, then used it against him. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "What happens now? To you, I mean. This house, this job. None of it was real." "No," I said. "But the food was real. The conversations were real. The friendship was real." "Is that what this was? Friendship?" I thought about it. I came here for revenge, but somewhere along the way, it became about something else, about truth, about justice, about making sure she couldn't hurt anyone else. "And Jordan?" I felt my cheeks warm. "Jordan is complicated." Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him since the arrests. "Love usually is." The trial began 6 months later. I'd moved back to Kansas by then, back to Joe and Martha and the life I'd built before revenge consumed me. But I returned to Connecticut to testify, to face Veronica one more time in a courtroom instead of a kitchen. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the orange jumpsuit and the weight of her crimes. But when she looked at me from the defendant's table, I saw the same cold calculation that had terrified me as a child. The prosecution calls Emma Morrison to the stand. Walking to that witness stand was like walking through 12 years of pain and planning and hope. When I placed my hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, I thought about my father, about the man who'd made pancakes and set out 2 coffee cups and loved me enough to fight for me. Please state your name for the record. My name is Emma Morrison, I said, my voice clear and strong. And I'm here to tell you about the night my father was murdered. I told them everything. About the affair I'd witnessed, about the fight I'd overheard, about watching Veronica leave the house with my father's car. I told them about the truck stop, about Joe and Martha, about the 12 years I'd spent planning this moment. Veronica's lawyer tried to discredit me, to paint me as a disturbed young woman seeking revenge against an innocent stepmother. But the evidence was overwhelming. The emails, the financial records, the recorded conversations, it all painted a picture of premeditated murder and systematic fraud. Vincent broke first. Faced with a mountain of evidence and the possibility of life in prison, he agreed to testify against Veronica in exchange for a reduced sentence. She planned everything, he said from the witness stand. The affair was just the beginning. She researched David's habits, his insurance policies, his business interests. She knew exactly how much money she stood to gain from his death. And the night of the murder? She called me after their fight. Said David had figured everything out, that we had to move fast. She drove his car to Route 1, forced him out at gunpoint, then called me to pick her up. We waited until we saw the NFL player's car coming. Then she pushed David into the road. What happened to the gun? Veronica threw it in Long Island Sound. Said it was untraceable anyway. She'd bought it from some guy in Bridgeport months earlier. The courtroom was silent as Vincent described the cold calculation behind my father's murder. But the most damning testimony came when he described what happened to me. Veronica wanted to kill the kid too, he said. Said Emma had seen too much, knew too much. But I talked her out of it. Said it would look suspicious if the stepdaughter died so soon after the father. So we came up with the abandonment plan instead. You drove an 8-year-old child to Nebraska and left her at a truck stop? Veronica said it would look like Emma had run away, that people would assume she couldn't handle losing another parent. We figured she'd end up in foster care, maybe get adopted, disappear into the system. Did you ever consider what would happen to her? Vincent shrugged. Wasn't my problem. I watched Veronica's face during his testimony, looking for some sign of remorse, some indication that she felt anything about what she'd done to me. But there was nothing. Just the same cold indifference I remembered from my childhood. When it was her turn to testify, Veronica maintained her innocence. She painted herself as a victim of Vincent's manipulation, claimed she'd been coerced into the affair and threatened into silence about the murder. I loved David, she said, tears streaming down her face. I would never have hurt him. Vincent said he'd kill me if I didn't go along with his plan. It was a masterful performance. If I hadn't known the truth, if I hadn't seen the real Veronica behind the mask, I might have believed her myself. But the jury had heard the recordings. They'd seen the emails. They'd listened to Vincent's detailed confession. After 3 days of deliberation, they returned with their verdict. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of child endangerment, we find the defendant guilty. The judge sentenced Veronica to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Vincent received 25 years for his cooperation. As the bailiff led Veronica away, she turned to look at me one last time. Her mask had finally slipped completely, revealing the monster underneath. You think you've won, she said, but you'll never be free of this. You'll never be free of me. You're right, I said. I'll never forget what you did, but I'm not that scared little girl anymore. And you? You're just a woman in a cage. For the first time in 12 years, I felt truly free. 6 months after the trial, I was back in Salina, working as head chef at a new restaurant that Joe and Martha had helped me open. It was small, nothing fancy, but it was mine. The kind of place where food was made with love and served with honesty. I called it Emma's Table. Jordan visited often. He'd left Connecticut after the trial, unable to stay in the house where he'd grown up believing lies. He'd started his own architectural firm in Kansas City, designing homes for families who wanted to build something real and lasting. "I have a confession," he said one evening, as we sat on the porch of my little house behind the restaurant. "I didn't just move to Kansas for work. No, I moved here for you, for us, for whatever this is between us." I looked at him, this man who'd been a kind boy, who'd grown into someone brave enough to help me seek justice, who'd chosen truth over comfort, even when it cost him everything he thought he knew about his family. "What is this between us?" I asked. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I'd like to find out, if you're willing." I thought about the 8-year-old girl who'd had a crush on the boy next door, about the 20-year-old woman who'd been afraid to trust anyone with her heart, about the person I was becoming, someone who'd learned that healing was possible, that love didn't have to come with conditions, that family was something you chose as much as something you were born into. "I'm willing," I said. We were married a year later, in the garden behind the restaurant, surrounded by the people who'd helped us become who we were meant to be. Joe walked me down the aisle. Martha cried through the entire ceremony. Marcus came too. He'd become something like a father figure to Jordan, helping him process the complicated grief of losing the only parents he'd ever known. "You know," Jordan said during our first dance, "I used to dream about the little girl next door. Wonder what happened to her, whether she was happy. And now you know. Now I know she grew up to be the strongest person I've ever met. Someone who turned pain into purpose, who chose justice over revenge, who built something beautiful out of something broken. We built something beautiful," I corrected. "Together." As we danced, I thought about my father, about the man who'd made pancakes and loved me unconditionally and died trying to protect me from the truth. I thought about Joe and Martha, who'd shown me that family was about choice and love, not just blood and obligation. I thought about Veronica, sitting in a prison cell, finally facing consequences for her actions. I didn't hate her anymore. I pitied her. Because she'd spent her entire life taking from others, never understanding that the things worth having, love, trust, belonging, could only be earned, never stolen. The restaurant thrived. Word spread about the chef who'd survived abandonment and abuse to create something beautiful. And people came not just for the food, but for the story, for the hope that broken things could be mended, that justice was possible, that love could triumph over cruelty. I started a foundation in my father's name, helping children who'd been abandoned or abused find safe homes and healing. Jordan designed the buildings, bright, welcoming spaces that felt like hope made tangible. Marcus became one of our biggest supporters, using his platform as a former NFL star to raise awareness and funds. He'd found his own healing in helping others, turning his guilt into action, his pain into purpose. "Your father would be proud," he told me at one of our fundraising galas. "Not just of what you've accomplished, but of who you've become." "I hope so," I said. "I think about him every day. Wonder what he'd think of all this. I think he'd say you turned out exactly as he hoped you would. Strong, kind, unbreakable." 5 years after the trial, I received a letter from Veronica. She was appealing her sentence, claiming new evidence, demanding I visit her in prison. I threw the letter away without reading it completely. Some doors, once closed, should stay that way. But I did visit Vincent once, near the end of his sentence. He was a broken man, aged beyond his years, haunted by the choices he'd made. "Why?" I asked him. "Why did you help her? Why did you go along with murdering an innocent man?" He was quiet for a long time. "I loved her," he said finally. "Or I thought I did. She made me feel like I was special, like I was the only one who understood her. I was so desperate to keep that feeling that I convinced myself everything we did was justified. And now? Now I know that what I thought was love was just obsession, addiction. She didn't love me any more than she loved your father or Marcus. We were all just tools to her, means to an end. Do you regret it? Every day, he said. But regret doesn't bring your father back. Doesn't undo the pain we caused you. I'll carry that weight for the rest of my life. I left that prison feeling something I hadn't expected. Closure. Not forgiveness. I wasn't ready for that, might never be ready for that, but understanding. Vincent had been a victim too, in his own way. A weak man manipulated by someone stronger and more ruthless. It didn't excuse what he'd done, but it helped me understand how people could make such terrible choices. On the 10th anniversary of my father's death, Jordan and I visited his grave in Greenwich. I brought flowers, daisies, his favorite, and a photo of our wedding. I wish you could have met him, I said to Jordan as we stood beside the headstone. He would have loved you, would have been so grateful that you helped me find my way home. I think I did meet him, Jordan said. In you. In the way you love without conditions, the way you fight for what's right, the way you make everyone around you feel safe and valued. That's his legacy, Emma. That's what he gave you. I knelt beside the grave and placed my hand on the cool marble. I did it, Dad, I whispered. I got justice for you, and I found my way back to love, back to family, back to hope. I'm okay. We're okay. The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment I could swear I smelled pancakes and heard the sound of my father's laughter. As we walked back to our car, Jordan took my hand. Ready to go home? He asked. I looked back at the grave one more time, then at the man beside me, my partner, my best friend, my chosen family. Yes, I said. I'm ready. We drove back to Kansas, back to our restaurant and our foundation and our life together. Back to the place where an abandoned little girl had learned to be strong, where a broken heart had learned to heal, where justice had finally found its way home. That night, I cooked dinner for our family. Jordan, Joe, Martha, and Marcus, who'd driven down from Kansas City for the anniversary. We sat around the table in my restaurant, sharing food and stories and laughter. You know what I love most about this place? Martha said, looking around at the warm, welcoming space we'd created. What's that? I asked. It feels like home, real home. The kind where everyone belongs, where everyone is safe, where love is the main ingredient in everything. I looked around the table at these people who'd chosen to love me, who'd helped me become who I was meant to be. Joe, who'd rescued a scared little girl and taught her to be strong. Martha, who'd shown me that food could be a language of love. Marcus, who'd turned his guilt into grace. Jordan, who'd helped me choose healing over hatred. That's because it is home, I said. This is what home looks like when you build it with love instead of lies, with truth instead of manipulation, with hope instead of fear. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Jordan and I sat in our kitchen, planning the menu for the next day. Any regrets? He asked. About how everything turned out? I thought about it seriously. About the pain and the planning and the years of anger that had driven me back to Greenwich. About the scared little girl I'd been and the strong woman I'd become. No, I said finally. I wouldn't change anything. Because if it had happened differently, I might not have found my way to Joe and Martha. I might not have learned to cook, might not have built this life, might not have found you again. Even the bad parts? Especially the bad parts. They taught me what I was capable of surviving, what I was capable of becoming. Jordan smiled and pulled me close. I love you, Emma Morrison. I love you too, Jordan Thompson. We sat there in comfortable silence, surrounded by the tools of my trade, the knives and pans and ingredients that had become my weapons and my healing, my art and my therapy. Tomorrow, we'd open the restaurant again. We'd serve food made with love to people who needed nourishment for their bodies and souls. We'd continue building our foundation, helping other children find their way home. We'd continue building our life together, one day at a time, one meal at a time, one act of love at a time. But tonight, we were just two people who'd found each other again after being lost for so long. Two people who'd learned that the best revenge isn't destruction, it's creation. It's building something beautiful where something ugly used to be. It's choosing love over hate, hope over despair, healing over revenge. It's learning that home isn't a place you're born into. It's a place you create with the people who choose to love you in the moments when you choose to love them back. And as I sat there in my kitchen, in my restaurant, in my chosen life, I realized something that would have amazed that 8-year-old girl sitting alone at a truck stop. I was finally, truly home. This story reminds us that healing is possible, that justice can be served without becoming the monster, and that the strongest revenge is living well. Sometimes the recipe for justice includes equal parts truth, courage, and love. And the most important ingredient of all is the choice to build rather than destroy. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear that broken things can be mended, that abandoned children can find their way home, and that love really can triumph over cruelty. What would you have done in Emma's situation? How far would you go for justice? Let me know in the comments below. And remember, you're stronger than you know, braver than you believe, and more loved than you can imagine.